Today we are looking at quite possibly the most irrelevant medium tank in World of Tanks console, and that is the Object 140. Now that's because this tank was, in the past, a fairly decent tank, and it actually had some advantages over some of the other tier 10 tanks that we had within World of Tanks. And of course I'm talking about the T-62A, which is the other tier 10 medium tank from the Soviet line, of course, branching off of the T-54. Both tanks are available at the moment as part of the on-track event that's going on in World of Tanks, so that's why we're showcasing it in today's video. Now, the key things about this tank over some of the others that you might see in the game is that it has really good DPM, and you're seeing that at the beginning here, having a reload super quick, allowing you to get some early damage. But the one negative of this vehicle over some of the others is that it's fairly kind of lackluster in a lot of areas, which means it's supposed to be this all-around medium tank, but actually when you compare it to its alternative, the T-62A, which got buffed and hence has become the dominant of the two, and that's really where Wargaming have made this tank completely irrelevant, because between the two it used to have the better DPM comparatively, but now what they've done is they've changed it up, and you have this tank actually having worse DPM than the T-62A. It also gets worse turret armor. I believe it also gets worse mobility, and in general, or maybe slightly increased mobility, I believe actually, but yeah, there is genuinely no reason why you would play this tank over some of the others, which is why I think Wargaming have definitely missed a trick with buffing the T-62A in the way that they did, and it's made this tank completely pointless. So I'm hoping what they'll do eventually is actually give this this tank a little bit of love and make it somewhat more relevant again within World of Tanks. And you're seeing here that when you can keep the gun firing, this tank is really good, but it is fairly inflexible, and it makes this tank kind of annoying to be able to reliably get damage in, because you've got to be finding targets that don't require any gun depression. You can't really use a kind of any of the hill areas, and even if you do, the turret armor isn't that good to the point where you won't just get penned anyway by anyone that knows how to aim in the game. So yeah, there's also that, but you can use this tank really well, and there are definitely some kind of things that you can do, because remember, it is similar to the T-62A, which is a good tank in all rights, and is still one that is fairly competent, and this tank is just slightly worse in pretty much everything than the T-62A, so you can still use it really well. It's just that it's not anywhere near a tank that you would probably jump into if you were wanting to be super competitive at tier 10 and come away with some of the bigger wins within World of Tanks. But nonetheless, you're seeing here 2,836 damage done with 1,273 assistance. You'll note that we can actually spot in this vehicle because it does have decent view range, and in fact if you're running a full camo and concealment build, then you can have some really good games, and you can definitely come away with some nice victories. Now we take our first shot of damage there, probably in the upper plate, since the upper plate of this tank is terrible, along with the lower plate, which is also equally as bad. So pretty much any round that hits the front of your tank is going to pen. Granted, some medium tanks lower tier than you and light tanks lower tier than you may bounce off of you, but ultimately, yeah, it's not a reliable tank to be able to bounce a few rounds, unlike the Progetto there, which is the other medium tank that of course gets gun depression, has slightly better armor, has a auto reloader. Yeah, I'm just feeling like the Object 140 is a bit irrelevant in World of Tanks 2022, so that's really where I'm feeling towards this vehicle. And I definitely used to play this a ton, and I really enjoyed it back in the day because it had great gun handling, it had amazing damage per minute, and it also had just a really accurate nice gun that I enjoyed using. But now when you look at it and you compare it to a lot of the other tanks, which of course on console we've had the upgrades to accuracy since probably 5 years ago when I last played this tank, yeah, I found that the accuracy of all of the other tanks got better, and yes, this tank becomes like super accurate, but it doesn't really affect it that much, whereas you're getting like chieftains with super high accuracy, you're getting other tanks that just have way better accuracy now, and it makes the accuracy, the advantage that this tank had in accuracy, just less, and so it becomes less of a reason to play it. But ultimately you can still have good results, and you can see in this game we've picked up 4,500 damage combined, which is not bad, with the majority being actual damage. Now, Fisherman's Bay is a weird map because there are 2 scenarios that usually happen if you spawn on the spawn that we had, which is either your team camp at the back in A and B 1-2 line, and you basically lose because no one is taking the mid-ridge, since the mid-ridge is super important for the game, as well as you can have the enemy tanks kind of YOLOing through the centre of the map, which is definitely not what you want. So you'll get people YOLOing over to try and get a shot into you, and you'll also get things like the E4 and in the town area where all of the heavy tanks have kind of YOLOed and ended up getting taken out themselves, and then you end up with a scenario where they come up from the left of you if you're in this position where I'm at. Now luckily none of that has actually happened with this game, so we don't have to worry, at least at this point in the game, towards any of that happening. And what we can do now is use the concealment of the Object 140, putting a couple bushes in between us and the opponents that are on the mid-ridge to avoid being detected, and come away with hopefully some wins and basically come away with a victory. So that's what we're hoping. Whether that is the actual case, you'll have to wait and see. Now we do have 2 replays in this video to showcase both, you know, the average games. They are nothing outstandingly spectacular, and I played quite a lot. I think I had like 2 gaming sessions using the 140, and I didn't really have any stellar gameplays, and I think mainly down to the maps, since I just didn't really get any of the greatest maps available for the 140, because a lot of them were hilly and stuff like that. And yes, you can still have great games on those, but they're not the easiest. It's not the most flexible tank that can come away with victories on those maps that require a bit more flexibility. So I'm not blaming the maps entirely, but it definitely didn't help, especially when you're trying to play a tank that you haven't played in like 6 years. So it takes a bit of getting used to, but you're seeing me here pick up nearly 4,000 damage, 1,500 assistance nearly, so looking at about 5,500 combined damage. We try and go for a shot on the E4, doesn't quite work, and that would have been nice to get some extra damage, but it's time to go after the Tortoise now, who's straight ahead of us, and hopefully we can get some extra damage on him. Now you see me going for the lower plate with heat, since the heat rounds are just a bit blatantly OP, and we managed to get some extra damage, also getting a little bit of spotting damage as well, as being part of the 1 of 2 vehicles actually spotting that tank. But nonetheless a victory. We do actually come 3rd in the game, coming 3rd to the Cobra T54, probably the most OP tier 9 vehicle in the game, if not the actual most broken tier 9 vehicle in the game, and of course coming below the T95E6, who had literally worse than everything except from the amount of tanks he took out. So there we go. Of course, a really good game, but let's jump into the next one to see what probably your more average game is going to look like. So the next map is more of a brawling map, and I know that the Soviet mediums are typically more brawly tanks, so I was thinking, you know what, this could be a good game, especially if we use everything that we know about the vehicle, being able to bounce potentially off the side armour, maybe side scraping potentially, and also using the mobility that's actually fairly okay for a medium. You're not like outstandingly better than any other medium in the game, but it allows you to keep up with some of the faster mediums in the game. You're looking at about 50 to 55 kilometers an hour, dependent on whether you're going completely flat or on down a hill, etc. But yeah, we can push early on in quickly enough to avoid getting hit in the left hand side from the people who usually camp on the enemy team in E4. Now if you camp in E4 and you well, not camp, but if you get there early in a light tank, often you can spot people crossing, which is always a really good early game spot and position that light tanks will use. Now we get out spotted here by someone, so we pull straight behind this rock, and this also provides cover from artillery, so it's unlikely we're going to be able to get hit, since they'd have to YOLO all the way through, and that's just not going to happen. We do spot the Object 705A, which we do hit quite nicely into the side of the tracks, and we go for another shot, so of course hitting him blind twice in a row, and then using the DPM to hopefully hit him a 3rd time, but unfortunately we don't manage to. Now this enemy AMX 13105 for some reason has got absolute something going on in his brain, and he's just YOLO through the centre of the map against all of the TDs and tank destroyers, etc. So he's definitely not feeling very good after that, and we love that because ultimately there's so many YOLO wagons that happen in World of Tanks that seeing them actually getting removed and their hit points actually terminated is quite nice. At least for once within World of Tanks console, because often it's not usually the case. They usually get away with it somehow. But yeah, either way, we've picked up 1,000 damage without having to receive any, and we've basically not even seen anyone be able to fire a shot at us, except from someone who appeared to be maybe like the 705A who tried a lucky shot at the side of us, but obviously not really anything too special or something to worry about. And at this point, I'm thinking 1900 damage done, or 1900 hit points allows us to trade, of course picking up 1,000 actual damage. And so now it's time we start thinking about what else can we do, because ultimately this position is kind of dried up, other than that light tank who I'd really like to get out of the game because he can be a nuisance, and sometimes it's about target priority and who to actually shoot at, because if we can get rid of him, that allows us to then kind of be more aggressive in the later stages, because remember, even a bad player in an autoloader can have a good result against you, because ultimately they could just be firing premium and autoloading. And against this tank that doesn't particularly have that much armor, you can definitely take quite a few hits, so that's not what we want to be seeing within the game. So I'm drying up in terms of how much damage we're doing. Yes, I know. And so we're kind of just sat here camping, essentially. And this is not my typical gameplay in a medium, but I feel like the 140 can be sometimes stuck in that region where it's like you could move forward, but remember, you don't have the best gun handling, which makes coming into corner fights or stuff like that really, really annoying. So there's all this sort of stuff that you have to think about. And of course, we want to make sure that we're not throwing ourselves away early, because medium tanks typically become better as the game goes on, because you can use the DPM to just farm at heavies that might have missed, or make open ground plays where you kind of rush forward and hopefully avoid any of the damage. And even if you do take a hit, therefore you can kind of move around and out traverse a lot of the heavy tanks that might be in the game and just be a real nuisance. Now the Chieftain does get spotted, and we're thinking maybe we could go after him and do something against him. But remember, in this sort of scenario, you know, the game is still quite early. Now, granted, 5 minutes have nearly passed and not a lot has happened, but of course there are still, like 11 vehicles on the enemy team that are all potentially sitting there waiting for someone to make their YOLO play, and we don't want to be that player. Now, you know, we could push forward around to the corner, but it's nice that we managed to actually hit the T100, because the more light tanks you can remove, the more chance of us being able to get spotting damage and remaining unspotted is, and therefore we can hopefully come away with a victory. Now I'm going after the Chieftain, who is of course sat behind that rock. We know where he is, he's been constantly spotted over there, so I'm just putting a few rounds. We obviously hit him there, but obviously didn't track him or anything like that, but the second shot does actually pen, and this is the sort of thing that you should be doing in your medium tanks, especially with the great fire rate you do get on the Object 140 and tanks like this with the same as the T62A, etc. Yeah, you can make advantage of the damage per minute to potentially get some damage on people like the RU251. Now you're seeing me get quite a bit of ping or ping delay, as you're seeing like things rubber band and stuff, which is not ideal, especially when playing World of Tanks, but hopefully, fingers crossed, that will be better from now on. But we'll have to wait and see. There's just a few more days before I'm hoping that everything will be sorted in terms of internet, and we can kind of move forward with hopefully no more ping spikes. But there we go. Yeah, either way, 2,500 damage has been done within this replay. We've not had to take any, which is a big result. But remember, sometimes it's the campy gameplays that actually end up ruining your own game, and it's about knowing when to push. Now at this point I'm thinking, you know what, there are only 8 tanks on the enemy team, and maybe it's time to start thinking about moving. And with the Chieftain actually moving out from position, it's time to do something, because I've been far too passive within this game, and at this point Yes, we may take a hit from the Centurion, but this is the scenario which I was talking about earlier where, wow, I can get hit once and he actually bounces, and then we can remove all of the rest of his hit points. That's 800 hit points, and we could have potentially taken, what, 1 hit. Now the T100 on the enemy team, for some reason, YOLOs through, so we finish him off quickly as well, and this is where it all starts accumulating, and you can start pumping opponents left, right and centre as the game progresses and you kind of move on. Now, we know that there are 4 tank destroyers. One of them is a Jaeger, which is not a tank you enjoy coming up against. And of course, we can push towards him. Whether or not we'll get any damage before he gets taken out is yet to be found out. But if we do push up this way, then maybe we'll be able to get 1 or maybe even 2 shots, or maybe just even help out this Sheridan, I believe, which is pushed behind the Jaeger. Now, we don't know whether the Jaeger has started to turn or whether he's still aiming over this way. Unfortunately, he is still aiming over this way, but for some reason, he does actually fire, and we're just trying to search for that shell into the Jaeger, but we don't manage to get it. Either way, we still come away with the victory against him, and in fact it's an EBR-90 that was behind the Jaeger, and now it's just a chance of trying to get this other Jaeger who's over here, and whether we'll be able to farm up a little bit of damage before the game ends, we don't know. But these are the scenarios that you like to be in, where maybe you found a tank that's kind of out in the open, or maybe you found a tank that is kind of available for you to just farm up. Now, we tried to go for the tracking shot on the Jaeger, but unfortunately we don't manage to get any assistance because it was a bit too early, I expect, and then we try and go for the 261, but are caught out yet again twice in a row by not having the fast enough shell velocity of the APCR rounds, which maybe we should have been firing against the artillery piece there. But either way, 3,958 damage with 1,400 assistance is a fairly decent game, which I'll not complain about whatsoever. But yeah, it was definitely not a vehicle that I found to be very good, and I certainly wouldn't recommend it as the go-to medium at tier 10 for most people to grind towards. But it is a fairly nice grind as you go through and you start learning all of the different techniques of angling and trying to avoid taking damage, whilst also not having like overpowered gun depression where maybe you have to think a bit more about your flexibility and positioning and stuff like that, which is always good, and it's a nice little learner to practice your skills in World of Tanks console. But either way, I wouldn't recommend the 140, just go for the T62A as it's probably the better of the 2 vehicles. Other than that, I hope you did enjoy this video. If you want me to cover any specific vehicles, leave them in the comment section down below, and don't forget to have a look at some of the other replays and gameplay and tank reviews that have come out recently, and those will be in the gameplay and tank reviews playlist on the right, and also the most recent gameplay video on the left hand side. So have a look at those, and I hope you did enjoy. See you in the next one. Goodbye.